Okay, I will go ahead and proceed. I'm Dr. Denise Logan. I represent Blue Care Network. Let's give them a hand. They're doing some fantastic things, some things that I'm going to be able to tell you about this afternoon, but I want to encourage you to get your blood pressures taken. We have staff from Blue Care Network who have come out to take blood pressures today and want to encourage you to be here for my 12:40 presentation because I have something special for you if you are a Blue Care Network commercial member. I have some advantages for you, and this is actually a program that I developed. They allowed me to do that, although I've only been there now a little over 2 years, but they saw the need, they listened to me, and they want to go ahead and implement it. Now let's go ahead and start today with the subject at hand. Now we first want to take a look at the first slide, and I like to move, okay? And we're going to, if you have a problem hearing me, just raise your hand, let me know. Now, we want to go ahead and start with our president. Our president, Barack Obama, came out and said, and he was standing in front of children who had written letters to the White House calling for fewer guns in the wake of the recent Sandy Hook. Everybody knew about the Sandy Hook school shooting, okay? But if you take a look at the Sandy Hook school shooting, you'll also notice that that involved people who don't look like us.
Yes.
Okay? And so you don't oftentimes see situations like that that look like us. But when we start to talk about mental illness, it's usually not people who are doing the shooting. They're usually the victims who have the mental illness. But what he said was he unveiled several measures that were based on recommendations that were gathered by Vice President Joe Biden's task force on that. Now, he did say that we'll make sure mental health professionals know their options for reporting threats of violence, even as we acknowledge that someone with a mental illness is far more likely to be a victim, just as I shared with you, of a violent crime than the perpetrator, okay? Now, in a statement, the president added that we're going to need to work on making access to mental health. This is very important. We actually have a mental health worker who can help us to provide that access in our congregation. I understand that to be Sister, thank you very much, Sister Gwen Allen. Quinn Allen, very good. And so I see that someone else is also aware that she is here to provide those kinds of access to that kind of service. Now, I know that within our culture, we say, ain't nothing wrong with me, okay? Because we don't believe that mental problems can occur within our culture. But you got that there wrong. That does occur in our culture. And if we're not treated, then other things can happen. Someone shared something very, very special very recently, and I wish I could disclose it, but I'll just say that a relative tried to take their life. And the issue was that they had a mental illness. It was a person of color. And they had this mental illness previously, but they did not seek out help. And they said like we do, it's not me, ain't nothing wrong with me, it must be y'all, because it ain't me, okay? And we always seem to say that, but sometimes it is us, and we do need help. We're not invincible. We're not Superman and Superwoman anymore. Next. Now, different manifestations of aggression. We're talking about the psychological issues in the hood. Notice it says neighborhood. I say it's in the hood, okay? And so we talk about those manifestations of aggression that can occur from childhood to early adulthood. And they're reviewed to establish how early manifestations are related to later manifestations. So we just don't wait and wake up as an adult and say, whatever, they're going to do something that's very aggressive, that's very antisocial. We actually start early. And it's not only just we, they do too. Now, the psychological issues here, there are some similarities and some differences in the manifestations of aggression. And this is between two genders. Now, we do, and we cannot deny that ladies don't act bad. There's a show on television, I think it's called Bad Girls. I don't watch it, but when I'm clicking, I see that and I keep clicking because they are acting bad. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if I acted like that, I'd want to be on television so everybody would know how bad I was, but they are. Now, temperamental, emotional, and cognitive aspects of aggression are reviewed either as precursors or co-occurring conditions to aggression. Selected processes in the realms of the family, that peer pressure, and the hood is highlighted, and it's known to be associated with juvenile aggression. Self-control. Now, what this talks about is that there were 1,000 children, and they looked at them from birth to age 37. They could see that self-control could predict physical health, substance dependence, personal finances, and criminal offending outcomes. And it all seemed to be related to self-control. Wow, just a little bitty thing there that we think of, but it's bigger than that. The effects of the children's self-control could be disentangled from their intelligence. So you can take that off no matter how intelligent they are or not. The self-control is still a very, very important piece. No matter how socially economical they may appear to be, the self-control is still a key factor in what they do as they get older. And I'm sure that Dr. Lowery James will be going on and talking more about that. Now, the need to delay gratification, control impulses, and modulate emotional expression is the earliest and most ubiquitous demand that society places on the children. And success at many life tasks depends critically on children's mastery of such self-control. When I was in college, I used to go home and visit my parents. And those would be very, very short visits. For those who have moved away from home and gone back to visit, you know you can only visit, you can't never really move back. And the reason why you can't is because you've developed your own self-control, you're independent, you want to do it the way you want to do it. And so I refer to those visits as popcorn visits. I pop in and pop out. And pretty much like this generation is now. It's an instant generation. It's an immediate gratification generation. They're not willing to delay gratification because they have very little to self-control. Now, there are some that have mastered that, and you'll see that they did not follow the same path as those who did not have self-control. Now, the result of this is if self-control is a fact, will follow a gradient, the interventions that achieve even small improvements. So don't think you have to have a big change. Gradually, do just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And what they found is that when they looked at them from age 3 to age 37, they actually changed their path. They actually developed self-control, and then they were able to add to society and to make a contribution because they did master self-control, okay? And that's for males and for females. Now, the second thing that this particular study, and it's the Dunedin, D-U-N-E-D-I-N study, said was that although the study did not include an intervention, some of the study members actually moved up, which is what I just told you. So they started at a certain level. But remember the window of opportunity. Guess, 3 years old. 3 years old. Remember, the study was from birth until age 37. So the window was 3 years old. As early as the age of 3, we were able to test the hypothesis that individual differences in preschoolers' self-control predict outcomes in adults. If so, early childhood would also be an intervention window. Policy making requires evidence that isolates self-control as the active ingredient affecting health, wealth, and crime, as opposed to other influences on children's futures, such as their intelligence or social class origins. Dunedin study data allowed the requisite statistical controls for IQ and social class. Outcome, think about it, and how this applies to what you see happening around you. One more slide, please. Your ability to have a belief and know and accept that someone else higher than you is in control, and that's God. That if you practice self-control and master it, you do have an opportunity to make less impulsive, aggressive, and more controlled decisions. That can help you to delay immediate gratification. It can give you the perseverance, the steadfastness, and patience to master the quality and length of your days on this earth. I pray, think before you act, and learn to use self-control. Now, I'd like to go ahead and take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Liesl Lowery James, who will go on and tell you more about adolescent behavior and mental health.
Good morning. So I will tell you a little bit about myself. I'm actually an adolescent doctor. I deal with teenagers every day, and I have a practice down at the Children's Hospital, and I have a partner. But as part of my duties, I also go to the Juvenile Detention Center, 2 of the school-based health clinics, one at Ottawa and one at City, formerly Creston. And so I'm out in the community, out and about. So fortunately, when I looked at the topic and the time frame and know we had about 20 minutes to cover everything, and knowing the audience, I actually kind of broadened the topic from just adolescent. I want to just kind of deal with a taboo subject in our community called behavioral mental health. And so when I looked at some of the data, some of it was kind of repetitive and overlapped. So we're gonna talk a little bit about, so I'm gonna start with some questions. We're in a Baptist church, so we like to respond. So the first question is, alcohol use and binge alcohol use, that's when you drink a lot of alcohol in one time. I know we're in church and no one really does that, but you may know someone who does that. So alcohol use and binge use are lower among African Americans over the age of 18 than the national average. True or false?
False.
True. Next slide. African American teens had lower rates of cigarette, marijuana, and alcohol use compared to the national average.
True.
Very good. Yep. Now we know there is an incline in the uses of marijuana use, especially in our young adults, but our use tends to be a little less than the national average. Next slide. African Americans are less likely to experience a psychiatric hospitalization than our white counterparts.
That's true.
And the reason it's false is, and there's a lot of factors that engage in this. One could be that we seek care later. The other thing is that we seek care in people who don't look like us, and they may under or overdiagnose us. So even though we are less likely to seek care and less likely to engage in care, a lot of times when we engage in care, we're likely to be hospitalized. Okay. We are more likely, I should say. All right. So statistics overall, now this is overall statistics, not just us, but if we look at, all of our counterparts, approximately 1 in 4 adults experience a mental illness in a given year. So that means some of us in this room know somebody who have had a mental illness, and that mental illness could be just an anxiety, it could be major depressive episode in a year, or that could be us. Approximately, again, this is all, approximately 1 in 17, so that's like 1, skip 2, 3, overall, not just African Americans, live with a serious mental health issue. And this is schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar disorder. And I really don't like the term bipolar, even though it is a true medical diagnosis, because I hear a lot of times people use it incorrectly. When some people are just acting weird, they go, oh, they must be bipolar. But there is truly a medical illness that's bipolar. So.
They say Adhd.
That's that new one.
HDD.
I mean, you know, that's what the kids always tell me.
Oh.
I'm ADD.
AD. And I purposely, now if we have time, and I know this got brought up in the session, we can talk about ADHD. I have some professional opinions, and I have some personal opinions on ADHD. So if we have time, because I know it's a hot button topic.
Because making mistakes is part of human. And so are we. We also have a new car replacement. So if you're totally record with your call Liberty Mutual Insurance at 1-888-398-3155 and ask us all about
in our culture. But overall, African American race, the first slides actually showed you our rates for mental health issues are pretty similar to the general population. Now, there's some variability based on when they tested it and where we are in the communities, but I want you to understand that if you don't take away anything else, that mental illness is an illness. If you go to sleep and wake up before lunch, mental illness is an illness. And then when we look at serious psychological distress in adults, when we look at African Americans, or in this study, it was non-Black. And I will say that some of the data is from different pockets of populations. So you can't say, oh, you said 3% in this slide and it's 5% in that slide. So I do want to be mindful of that. It's about 3.8% in us and about 3.1% in non-Hispanic whites. And then this is a slide, and just to show you that this study looked at 2010 and the percentage of feeling sadness, hopelessness, worthlessness, and everything is an effort. I know no one in this room has ever felt like that. Among adults is, when we look at sadness, is about 4.2% compared to our non-Hispanic whites, about 2.8%. Everything is an effort, 9.9 versus 5.6. And again, it could be the psychological, psychosocial, poverty, what are you dealing with? But we tend to a lot of times feel it a little more. And then I know this is a men's conference, but I just wanted to share some data. When they looked at men, non-Hispanic Black men and non-Hispanic white men, their rates were 3 to 2.5. And then when we look and that's just overall sadness. And when we looked at non-Hispanic Black women, our rates were about 5.2 to 3.2%. So generally a ratio of 1 to 6, 1 to 7. Again, depending on the situation. And they did even look at this data a little deeper and look at, if is poverty a factor, your living situation is a factor. So that was all dependent on that. All right. So I did want to talk about this, and this is actually, it's somewhat a taboo subject, especially in the church community and suicide. But we know that suicide rate in African Americans is about 60% lower than our non-Hispanic whites. Men are more likely to our Black men are more likely to kill themselves than our Black women because they tend to use more lethal force. Women tend to take pills, men tend to shoot themselves. Okay, and I don't think that's really surprising to anyone in this room. We know that suicide is the third leading cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds. The top two being what? Gunshots and motor vehicle. And when you look at, and if you tease that out for who do you think are more likely to die of gunshots? Okay. Well, some other interesting data is that we've also noted that the rate of suicide among our young people is actually going up to about 233%. And we know that this young man here deals with pressures that I didn't deal with when I was in school, just a few years before him, not too long ago. But his have you ever heard about bullying on Facebook? People get bullied on Facebook. People get bullied on Instagram. People text you and bully. Now we didn't have, so That's true. And so the bullying doesn't stop at 2:30 or 3 o'clock anymore or during the week. It continues. Oh, it continues all day, all night. And I'm amazed at how many of my young people don't turn their phones off at night. They phones are there all night, all day. And I told one young lady, she was 14, I said, there's nothing interesting in your life going on between 11 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning. 11 p.m. to 6 o'clock. Yes, sir.
Is this a step for everyone, or is that just for us?
The suicide is for everyone. African Americans is the increase.
Okay.
So for African Americans, we've had a 230% increase compared to our white counterparts. Dr. Logan mentioned this earlier, but most of our kids are not going to come to us and say they're depressed. I'm down. It's going to present as aggression. It's going to present as isolation. Their grades are going to stop. Their grades are going to fall. And then, you know, the whole discussion of do they have a learning problem, ADHD, all this issue. So very few people are going to come and say, hey, Dr. Lowery, I think I'm depressed. Mom is going to come to me and say something is wrong with him. He is just too moody. You know, I don't know what's going on in the household. Can you test him for drugs? He just acting weird all of a sudden. So, but very few people are going to come into my office and say, I think they're depressed. Now, I will admit, because depression, and we're talking about mental health issues more and more in our community, I think people are being more aware of it. But a lot of times we want to attribute it to something else than really a mood or mental issue. Now, somatization, and I put this up here because somatization is actually the manifestation of a physical illness related to mental health. And basically what we see is we see these kids come in, or adults actually, young people and adults come in and they have chronic headaches, chronic back pain, chronic abdominal pain. And you do all the workup in the world and we can't figure out what's wrong with them. But then when you dig deeper into their life, yeah, well, you know, I'm dealing with being bullied, I'm getting beat up, mom is, you know, she's not around, I'm basically taking care of all my little sisters, and all of a sudden it starts clicking. So it's very easy, and then sometimes these people get CAT scans, MRIs, unnecessary tests, and no one's really stepped back and said, well, how are you doing? How are things going? What's going on at home? And then this is true for adults. Chronic headaches, chronic back pain. You get diagnosed with a lot, chest pain. I think I'm having a heart attack. You could be having a heart attack, and I want you to go get checked if you think you're having a heart attack. But also what are you dealing with? Are you dealing with crazy work, taking care of your mom, taking care of your kids, you know, being Superman, Superwoman, and then not taking time out for yourself? And we're more likely to have these, what we call somatizations, more than our white counterparts. Partner violence. Now, this statistic is overall, not just among African Americans. 10% of students nationwide report being physically hurt by a boyfriend or a girlfriend in the past 12 months. Would you say that's true? Do you know people in your school that get beat up by their boyfriend or girlfriend? You don't? Have you ever heard of that? People getting beat up by their girlfriend? Good. All right. And then 1 in 4 adolescents reports verbally, physical, emotional, or sexual violence each year. That's 1 in 4. Now, this is just not in our community. It's nationwide. Risk factors. So what are risk factors for mental health issues? Family history. Now, we don't want to talk about it, but just like diabetes, hypertension, asthma, and other illnesses run in families, mental health issues run in families. And as soon as I'm talking to a kid and mom's concerned about this mental illness, I usually say, is there anyone else in the family who has issues? You know, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, this mood disorder. And the majority of the time there is someone. Now it might be that old Aunt Sheila who always acted crazy, but there's usually a family history. Homelessness. Now, homelessness is a risk factor for a mental illness, but we also know that there's a high propensity of people that are homeless who have mental illnesses. And African Americans make up about 40% of the homeless population. So sometimes this could be a chicken or the egg kind of thing. What came first, mental illness or being homeless? Incarceration. Again, similarly, are you incarcerated because you have a mental illness and you did something to get you there? Or while you're there, are you depressed? Foster care. Foster care is a risk factor for mental illness. But I'll also share with you that 45%, African Americans make up about 45% of the foster care population. But now, let me go back and make you think about that. Is the kid in foster care because mom and dad have a mental illness or a substance abuse issue and the kids get taken away from them and then they're in foster care? So to me, it could be a vicious cycle that we're dealing with. But again, they're at risk for developing depression, reactive attachment disorder, post-traumatic syndrome, exposure to violence. That increases your risk of developing a mental illness. And we know that 25% of African American children exposed to violence meet criteria for something we call post-traumatic stress disorder. And it could be any type of violence. It could be seeing mom get beat up, be in an unsafe relationship. It could be exposure to gang violence, but that puts you at risk for a mental health issue. So it's more than just Blue Monday. So what's the problem? Well, we talk about this a little bit. 1 out of 3 African Americans who need mental health care actually receive it. 1 out of 3, so that's just a third of us. And African Americans were more likely to stop treatment and less likely to follow up care. Oh, I'm feeling better, so I just stopped going. I'm good, I'm cured. I'm over all of that. It's more than the blues. It's a medical condition. Just like your diabetes, just like your hypertension, just like your asthma, it is a medical condition. Does not mean you're crazy. I hear, it does not mean that you're crazy. It means you have a medical condition. You have a chemical imbalance. It could be something, or are you dealing with something that happened to you in your past? I hear, I ain't taking no medication. I said, ain't taking no medication because, fill in the blank, so-and-so took that medication and they haven't been right since. Sounds familiar? Why don't we seek health care? Well, multiple reasons. African Americans as a whole cope in various ways. How do we cope? We turn to family. And some of our family are more crazy than us. Amen. And no, don't get me wrong, and I'm not saying just always come to a health professional, but you want to come to the right family member. Who are you listening to, okay? We turn our friends, again, some of our friends, but again, and I'm not saying these are bad influences, but you want to make sure you turn to the right people. We turn to our neighbors. We go to church, we turn to our pastor, we turn to our spiritual leaders. Or we're isolated. We start checking out of stuff. I'm gonna stop going here, I'm gonna stop hanging out. I don't return their phone calls. Or we self-medicate with drugs, alcohol, self-destructive behaviors, and bad relationships. So why don't we seek professional help? Stigma. There's still a stigma in 2014 about going, 11:45, about seeking mental health care. It's a stigma. You're afraid of being labeled. We don't like to air our dirty laundry. We need to keep that at home. That's private business. We don't talk about crazy Uncle so-and-so. That is just family stuff. We're embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to go seek medical care. I'm embarrassed to go see a counselor. But you go up in the Myers and the mall all the time. I'm like, is somebody following you to your counselor? Why do you care? It reflects bad on the family. I'm not gonna go because I'm not sure how mom and auntie gonna feel about that. Or we could handle this at home. we got this. And so they feel it's a family failure not to handle it at home. A sense of, if I could just be stronger. I should just be stronger. I should just, I can just deal with this. I saw my mama and she dealt with this. The flip side of that, I've had parents say, well, I don't know why she has that issue, with, being molested. It happened to me and I turned out fine. I'm like, really? You're not fine. And we don't do counseling. That's for them. Them. We don't do that. And the thing is, it's across culture. It's counseling and seeking help is just not necessarily psychologically or, social economically. It's across cultures. So no matter how much money you're making, we don't do that. I can't find anyone around who understands my people and our culture. And it's going to be hard since only 2% of people, 2%, there's psychiatrists that are African-American, about 2%, psychologists that are African-American, about 2%, and social workers make up about 4%. So you're not going to really find anybody. But I challenge you to seek out someone. And they don't have to actually look like you to be able to help you. And then I fear that if I say too much, they're going to lock me up and take away my kids. I fear that if you don't go, you're going to get worse and they're going to lock you up and take away your kids. That's right. Barriers to access, we know that insurance, lack of coverage, lack of culturally competent services, people who don't look like us or don't really understand. Sometimes you do get tired of explaining everything, why you do this, why you do that. Dealing with more pressing issues. If I'm worried about how to pay my bills, if I'm worried about taking care of my diabetes, or if I'm worried about my kids doing this, I'm not going to be too concerned about my mental health at this time. Distrust of the healthcare system. People don't trust talking to us. People are very guarded. And the main barrier to access is you. The person in the mirror. I'm not talking about Michael Jackson here. I'm talking about you. Some people just don't want to step out and seek care. Like I said, mental illness is an illness. We have to make taking care of ourselves a priority. Step back and slow down, and I should do that for myself. The power of no. And the power of no, it doesn't mean saying, no, I ain't gonna do that. It means saying, I can't really help you on that committee right now because I got a lot of stuff going on in my life. Or going to that friend and saying, no, you don't have to come to that West Michigan Medical Society meeting because you got enough stuff to take care of. And banning her and saying, no, you can't come. And I actually did tell her that once. I said, you ain't coming. But it's being supportive, and showing someone love. And then asking for help. It's okay to ask for help. And then counseling. And I put counseling in a box of chocolates, not counseling and eat chocolates, but one of my coworkers who's a social worker who actually says, keep going to counseling. And she says, if you find a counselor that you guys don't connect with, she explains counselors are like a box of chocolates. You may open it and look at it, and you may like caramel, and you may like cherry. And you may like white chocolate. So there's different counselors that are out there. So just because, and so many times I hear, well, I'm not going to counseling because that didn't work for me. Try someone else, or go there and say, you know what, I really didn't bond with Sharon. Is there someone else there that I can bond with? Or, that I feel that can take better care of me. Community resources, and there's a lot just here, but just, contacting your insurance company, contacting if you have counseling services through your employer. Ask your healthcare provider, who do you recommend? Who do you deal with? Because a lot of times we have a list of people that we specifically will send you to that we think are good. Network 180, Arbor Circle, Family Outreach. These are just some of the resources in our community that I list, and I'm sure there's more. But actually going out there, and if you're reaching barriers, then calling your healthcare provider and saying, you know what, I'm getting pushback because of this. Can you help me? I will say this is easier said than done. Just accessing resources is painful. It takes me, if I were going to use my insurance to get in contact with a counselor, it takes me 3 separate phone calls. 3. Now, what if I don't have enough minutes on my phone? I mean, those are the real things we deal with. And so I deal with a lot of teenagers and young adults, we reach out and we help these kids make those connections. fears. And I put medications out here, and I'm a doctor, and I'm not a big pill pusher. I believe that we use medicines to help us, but a lot of things, if we do some lifestyle changes, I try to deal more of a holistic approach. But if one doesn't work, if we're at the point that you need medications, if the first one doesn't work, number one, let your provider know. If we put you on a medicine and it don't work or you having side effects, please call me and let me know. It don't help me that if I put you on a medicine and you started and then you stopped it because you didn't like it after 3 days, and then you come and tell me 6 weeks later, that ain't helping me. And that's with any medicine. So please let us know. You may need to try more than one. The problem with the medicines we use for behavior, it's not like a Tylenol or an ibuprofen or a Vicodin or something. We give it to you, and it works in that brain chemistry, and we hope it works. And the medicine that worked for you might not work for you. And the medicine work for you might not work for you. So a lot of times I'll say, is anyone in your family on mood medicines? What helped? What's working for them? What didn't work for them? And again, I think it needs to be paired with counseling and any lifestyle changes and stepping back. So that's all I had to say, and I hope we can leave if we have time. I don't know, we probably are close to lunch, but thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, we have time for one question.
One question. Better make it good.
One question. ADHD.
ADHD.
Please.
ADHD, okay.
Professional and your...
Okay, ADHD is a true medical diagnosis. ADHD, we all know that there are people out there who have ADHD. I think also we have had an increase in diagnosis for ADHD for various reasons. Some of it is the societal constraints. Now, so I think we are diagnosing kids with ADHD more because we have better tools, better screeners. It's just not the kid that's running across the room. So I think, yes, it is a true diagnosis, and yes, we need to be mindful of it and not be so fearful of the diagnosis. The other thing is, don't let people just diagnose your child with ADHD without the proper evaluation. Number one, because we know that if we diagnose all these kids with ADHD just flat out, we miss about 30% of other underlying illnesses like learning disabilities, depression, anxiety, and things like that. So anytime, and nothing makes me madder for a parent to come in and say, the teacher said you need to start them on medicines. And I say, did the teacher test them? Are we sure we having a learning disability, or what's the issue? So I think, and then some of it is behavior. If you ain't raised your child to have self-control, and the problem is, if you have, now look, this young man, he's been sitting here, he's been attentive, you know, everything, I'm not embarrassing you. That did not happen yesterday. That started when he was 2 months old, 3 months old, 2 years old. And so many times we don't raise, it's cute at 2, and at 10, and at 12, they on Cedar Street. That's where juvie is, okay? And then, you know, then at 17, they on Ball. Okay, so the thing is, we also need to put in our kids love borders and guidelines and restrictions. So the thing is, you let Junebug run around and do what he want to do, he up here, down there, until he's 3 or 4, then you put him in Head Start, and okay, he's a little active. Then you put him in kindergarten, and okay, well, he has to repeat kindergarten 1 year, and you still haven't raised Junebug. Then when Junebug gets in six, you know, he gets 6 and 7, there's a pattern, and I trust you. Once they get labeled, I don't care what they say, it is hard to get that label off of them. And the other thing is, parents, we need to go to the school more than when they're in trouble. That's right. Yeah. And so I philosophically have a lot of issues. Yes, ADHD. And the thing is, when you're in my office, I tell kids, so what, you have a diagnosis of ADHD? You can be anything you want. One of the smartest people I know, who was my mentor at Johns Hopkins, who's currently running Johns Hopkins in Florida, has horrible ADHD. He is the worst person in a meeting you want to sit next to, but the man is brilliant. So you can do anything what you want to do. And so that's one of the things, don't use it as a crutch. And then the other, yeah, I won't get to, I was gonna say something very politically correct. But anyway, so there's a lot of societal factors around ADHD. And the other thing I think, now this is just my personal opinion, the reason we're seeing so much ADHD is because our kids don't go out and play. And they sit in homes and they sit around grown folks' conversations. So what happens is, so back in the day, I used to get up and run outside and, you know, stay outside from sun up to sundown. Now they're at home. Or doing this, that, you know, y'all got the thing. And so you haven't established the ability to sit and focus. And so we need to have them go outside. Go outside with them if you feel it's unsafe. Get that exercise, hang out with your kids. So I think if we do some things that in our culture, in our environment, do some get better parenting skills. Don't just let them diagnose them. Make sure they have been tested for learning disabilities and other things. Go to schools, and then if you're concerned, then we can call it ADHD. I'm sorry, that is a very long answer. That's why I said I'm gonna stay away from ADHD.